Sweeping views of Cape Town, sweeping views of the Table Bay Hotel, home for today's live tasting. Welcome to Dan Really Likes Wine, presented by Pick n Pay, coming to you from a hotel that last weekend hosted Miss South Africa. Today, far more importantly, hosts a wine tasting with Dan Really Likes Wine. The hotel reopens this weekend. I'm down to host that reopening, and there's a lot of fun planned over the next few days. PJ Powers has come down in all her might and fury to deliver some musical grandeur to the next few days. Miss South Africa herself, Shudofadzo, will be floating around, tiara in place, as one of the official hosts as well over the next few days. And I'm just going to be drinking wine, enjoying hopefully some sunshine, and living it up at a hotel I've come to know really well. My other show, The Dan Nicholl Show, calls the Table Bay home when down in Cape Town. So it's terrific to be here over the next few days. And a big thank you to Joanne Selby and her team, who always look after us so well. And they do so in many ways. The hospitality is terrific. The food is great. The location is fabulous. And then there is a wine list. And it's a wine list I'm rather fond of because it, for me, has the elements of the best wine list. It's not 8 million pages long. You're not flicking through the Beijing phone directory trying to find something you might have heard of or possibly like. It's just a really well curated wine list that touches on all the right points. Lots of different varietals, lots of different blends, lots of different regions, and it comes together rather nicely indeed. And so it is from that wine list that I've chosen our 3 wines today, and as a result roped in some people from each of the relevant estates to talk through some bubbles, talk through a lovely white, and to talk through a fairly iconic Stellenbosch red. So who do we have today? Well, the white we'll be chatting about just a little later is the Hope Marguerite, a quite fabulous South African Chenin Blanc from out in the Potrefair area, the 2018. And Sebastian Beaumont will be running us through that particular wine, as well as telling us the really cool story of his little wine corner. We'll also be heading out to Stellenbosch, where Spicer de Villiers, one of the great surfing wine characters, will be running through the Tamboerskloof syrah and explaining that there isn't actually a vineyard in Tamboerskloof. I remember looking for it every time I drove past after I discovered the wine, not realizing it was actually out in Stellenbosch. But we kick off with an estate that I've seen many, 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 many times on the Absa Cape Epic. The race has gone through this particular estate, or if it's just been in the Elgin area, I've dropped by to sample some of what I genuinely feel is South Africa's finest Cup Classique. It sits right up there with the Graham Becks and with the Leludes and the Colmonts and the Silverthorns. It's just really well made South African Cup Classique, and it's not entirely surprising because the person who assists with the winemaking is somebody with a strong champagne making background. Now, Charles Fox himself is not with us, but we've gone one better, I think. Zelda Fox is with us instead. Zelda, very warm welcome. Lovely to see you.
Nice to see you as well.
And normally we see each other in your lovely little vineyard, in your cellar, and explore some of the new vintages, talk through some of the older ones. And it's always great fun. But it's also great fun introducing people to your story for the first time, as I was introduced to it many years ago. Explain to people how the Fox clan left Johannesburg, made their way down, got rid of a whole pile of fruit, and created what is now, I think, a fairly iconic South African Cup Classique home.
Yeah, no, well, people ask me why we're here. So usually I turn around and say to them, listen, who wants to live in Joburg anymore? It was too stressful. It was just way too much for us. And, it was Charles's dream of having a wine farm. But unfortunately, even in those days, you couldn't buy a wine farm for the love of money because it was just way out of our league. So what did we do is we did a lot of research, and Charles wanted to do bubbly, and it's something he'd always set his heart on. And, we decided, and, along with the soils of the farm and the area and the climate, Elgin was the best way to go. But there weren't very many wine farms in Elgin, so we bought an apple, pear, and plum farm. So we started off with that. We had to learn the hard way of doing fruit farming before we even started planting vineyards. So we had some fallow land. In 2007, we planted our first vineyards, 2007 and 2008. And our first vintage was 2010. Very scary for us. Fortunately, Charles met up with Nicola. He's our consultant. And the three of us have been running things pretty much ever since. We all have our own little specific jobs to do and all good at it. And we try not to tread on each other's toes when it comes to the winemaking.
The product that you now produce, we have you here today because you're sitting on the wine list of the Table Bay. It's a 5-star hotel that people visit from all over the world. It's a really great endorsement of what you've made. When you first started out, it almost has the feel like, well, this is going to be a hobby. Charles would like to make some bubbles. Did you foresee that what was the initial vision could get to a space where we're now seeing and drinking Charles Fox, not just all over South Africa, but all over the world?
Yeah, well, you could say it was supposed to be a hobby right from the beginning, but there's no such thing as a gentleman wine farmer. It's all too much work, and you've always got to have your finger on the pulse all the time. So you cannot let it go. You cannot think you can stand back and let it, run itself from the sides. It is a lot of work and a lot of very hard work, but we enjoy it. And, it's been a long time, sort of like slowly taking small steps and until we get to where we are today. So, I'm quite happy to say that we represented in quite a few countries. So, we really enjoy what we're doing.
In this story of yours, and it's a wonderful story, what's been the most difficult moment, the moment where you guys thought, is this all really worth it? And then as a counterpoint, what was the moment where you looked at each other and you said, you know what, I think we've done this?
I think one of the biggest things is what people don't understand is now we've really done it. It is the answer to that question. It's every single year I'm sitting on a knife's edge, and it's, harvest time, but much more important than harvest, or just as important as harvest, is the bottling time of the MCC. You always worried about your second fermentation every single year. And, it's living on a knife edge. I mean, it's quite daunting. But, once the final bottle is bottled and it's sitting down in the cellar and our first 6 weeks are over and we've got our pressure in our bottles, that's the only time we sort of like get to breathe a little bit easier for that year. But then it starts all over from the beginning again. Now, what are we going to do with this wine and how are we going to market it? And, who's going to buy it? All of those questions. And I mean, it's not just a simple exercise every single year. Wines don't sell themselves. You've got to go out and sell them. But in a big thing, they do sell themselves, because if you haven't got the quality, nobody will want it in the first place.
Yeah, I was going to say, I think your marketing has helped considerably by the quality of your product and the demand it has created. And it's demand over a range. We're going to be trying some vintage rosé in just a second, and I'm really excited to see where this 11 is sitting. But it's not just a rosé that you have. You've got a whole range. Explain to us what you have, and in particular, what the cipher is and where that name comes from.
Okay, so we've got basically 6 wines or bubblies in our portfolio. So we've got 2 reserves, the Reserve Brut and Reserve Rosé. The difference between our reserves and a lot of other reserves, I do also stand to correction, is, minimum aging for reserves is 9 months on the lease. It's going to move to minimum 1 year on the lease, all of our reserves are minimum 2 years on the lease. So, they've had quite a lot of tank time as well as barrel time to soften them. And that's why you actually don't need such long lease contact. So you can release them a little bit earlier. Then we've got our 2 vintages, which are the Vintage Brut and the Vintage Brut Rosé. We do minimum 3 years on the lease for those, going on a little bit longer. And what we try and aim to achieve with the vintages is, as the time has gone by, we don't use any reserve wine at all for the vintages, and we use only cuvee. That is what we are aiming for. But if you do that, your acidity is quite a lot higher. So you need a longer time on the lease. And then our 2 prestige cuvées, which is the Blanc de Blanc and the Cypher. So cuvée only, both we love to, how can I say, keep these 2 strictly in the Brut, minimum 5. We try and do 5 years aging on the lease. The Blanc de Blanc was proved to be a little bit too popular, and we didn't make enough. So we sold out of that one very quickly. So we are currently sitting on the 16, which is 4 years on the lease. The Cypher, it's our special little baby. We only make, or can only make, very small quantities of that every year, because we only use our select vineyards and barrels and juice fractions, and it's what we call the best of the best. Cypher means code or 0, stemming from the Phoenicians, zepho, meaning 0. So it's our 0 compromise wine, and it is absolutely beautiful, smooth, elegant, well balanced. So we really enjoy that one as our special occasion wine. It's not just a normal sweet wine, or it's not what a person would normally take as a wine, having savory characteristics, which is really what is really beautiful about that wine. You can actually pair it with sweet as well as savory dishes, and you don't have to use the Cypher just as an aperitif, which is one of the nicest things there.
It's one of many wines that doesn't tend to hang around too long in the Dan Really Likes Wine cellar. It is a very alluring bottle, as I'm sure will this one in particular be, the Rosé. This is a 2011. Before I have my first sip of it, quite a debate, conversation I've had with a number of Cup Classique producers. I think back to Peter Ferreira not that long ago in particular, talking about the aging of it. And it's maybe something we don't know enough about, don't understand enough about in South Africa. We talk about aging our reds. We're starting to learn a bit more about aging some of our Chardonnays and our Chenons, but we don't always talk about the importance of a vintage and of giving time age. You guys are very patient with your process. You spend so much time with the wine in cellar. Why is it so important, and what are we getting? What is our reward for this patience?
Well, the reward for that patience, I think, is really, it boils down to what you're going to finally get as a completely well-balanced wine. Now, us in Elgin, we're completely different from pretty much everywhere else in South Africa. Elgin has this lovely terroir where we can get perfect sugars as well as perfect acidity in the wines, and that's where the patience has to come in for the aging of the wine. So not just cellar aging, but aging on the cork as well. So it gives it a little bit more of a beautiful rounder mouthfeel. If you haven't got that acidity, that wine after a couple of years will be very flabby and it won't be enjoyable. So you need that good acidity to see the wine through to, when you're drinking it. And I'm also having a glass. It is absolutely beautiful.
Yeah, there's a richness to it. There's a depth to it. It is delightful, and I think it's benefited so much from almost a decade. Is this something keep even longer? Is there a shelf life for you for the very best of the Cup Classique you produce?
Well, the biggest thing about, how can I say, bubblies, so shelf life is all dependent on you and your storage conditions, how you like to keep your wine. So that is the main thing. You can't let a bottle of bubbly stand up on the shelf and it be exposed to light, because it just won't be very good anymore. It'll start tasting like cauliflower or cabbage. Not very pleasant. But it depends on your storage conditions, and you can keep a very good bubbly for at least 10 years if your storage conditions are good. So, and then the drinking is always also so much more pleasurable as well.
I think the storage conditions must be pretty good here at the Table Bay, because this is an absolute delight to drink, which is not unusual for Charles Fox. You and Charles have given me many, many happy memories, both visiting and drinking everything you flogged to me after giving me too much of a tasting, and then swiping my credit card for numerous cases, which has all been done very happily. Zelda, thank you so much. It's lovely to be able to taste it. Lovely to get some expert conversation to go along with it. And keep making fabulous Cup Classique and showing the French how to do it properly.
Well, I've got a Frenchman showing an Englishman how to do it properly as well. So,
brilliant. Well, please give Charles our warm regards, and Nicola as well. You guys are doing a wonderful, wonderful job. And here's to many, many more years of bubbly and effervescent Charles Fox brilliance.
Thank you.
So there we go, from Elgin, and well worth a visit. In fact, that whole stretch, there's so many cool people out in that part of the world. There's a selection of mad Belgians at places like Almenkirk and Speenkop in particular. Kuhn, utterly mad, but utterly lovely. You've got just around the corner, Paul Wallace and his collection, his Black Dog Malbec in particular. But for me, a cornerstone of any Elgin wine route is dropping in and trying out some of the Charles Fox Cup Classique. It really is a wonderful endorsement of how well we do bubbles here in South Africa. Going to be seeing a lot of bubbles this weekend at the Table Bay. The aforementioned Bubbles Ferreira, Peter Ferreira from Graham Beck, will be with me here on Saturday night, having a very special evening that will also include Mark LaRue from Waterford, and will include Monet Frey, who is joining us from Delegraph. Some lovely wine in store there, but some lovely wine in store right now. We've already had one terrific glass. Let's move on to a second. And this is another great part of South Africa's Chenin Blanc story, a story which I celebrate very happily and very proudly. This is the Hope Marguerite. It comes from Beaumont. The man behind Beaumont is Sebastian Beaumont. Sebastian, good evening. Welcome to Dan Really Likes Wine. How are you?
I'm all right, Dan. Jeez. It's nice to join you. Yeah, not too far from the Charles Foxes around, like nice to see Zelda, and it was definitely a bubbly that we punished a few bottles of during the lockdown, locked in at the Beaumont cellar. We don't make bubbly, so I really take my hat off to them. They've done a great job with creating a fantastic brand in Elgin there.
Yeah, you've preempted me. I was going to ask you about your thoughts on it, so I'll change the question ever so slightly. You replicate, just from your comments there, what I've seen all the way through our conversation, especially in lockdown, people celebrating not just their own wine, but celebrating each other, celebrating their neighbors, celebrating their fellow winemakers. I love the fraternity or sorority, perhaps in this case, that exists in our wine community, and it's clearly strong in Potrefier and Elgin as well.
In the Potrefier, for sure. Yeah, if you're a serious winemaker and you only drink your own wine, you've got a problem. You need to. That's proper lockdown. You need to expand your palate. And I think we have such great wines in our areas and so close to us, and yeah, it's a real treat to enjoy. We did a lot of tasting during lockdown of stuff that was in the cellar. Found some fascinating stuff from the 90s and the 2000s, and yeah, it was actually a good experience.
Well, I'm sure there were many who found a few bottles of Beaumont and had a particularly good experience as well. And we've got one of those bottles to try in just a moment. Two things before we do that, though. The first is pass on a hello from Ina Smith from the Chenin Blanc Association, who's busy watching on Facebook, saying, the Chenin dude, please say hi to Sebastian. Thank you, Ina. Lovely to have you watching, as you do so frequently. And then the second is to ask for a little bit of background, a little bit of history, and the Beaumont story, because every time I've visited, and I've probably been half a dozen times over the years down to Beaumont, leaving with plenty of wine, I always get new strands to this story, new stories of the past, of family members, of how they've all weaved together into the present day. So give us the tapestry that is the Beaumont wine story.
Yeah, sure, man. It's I think fundamentally, tonight or this afternoon, you're talking to three proper family businesses. So ours is a true family farming business that started off in the 70s with my parents finding this rundown old wine farm, and in the thriving metropolis of Bot River, and they were the kind of like these English-speaking people who came from. My father came from farming in Elgin, and my mother came from Cape Town, and they came to Bot River where they were the only English-speaking people. So they suddenly had to kind of get to know the neighbors pretty well, which were mostly sheep and wheat farmers around here. So there weren't too many wine farms. There's Wilderkrans across the road. And yeah, we kind of started off just growing grapes, and we had this kind of dormant old wine cellar sitting here that wasn't really doing anything with it. I can show you. It had a few. If you can look in the distance in the background there now, there's some of the labels from the previous producers of wine in the cellar, and they made a range of wines. Actually, quite an interesting range. We just found the labels. We never tried the wines, but they made like Jerepigos and Steen and dry reds and white ports and all kinds of stuff. So we found all these labels lying here. So they obviously had quite an interesting market at that time. And obviously being on this side of the mountains, out near Omanus, it was quite difficult to get wine back to Cape Town and to the market. So probably making wine for the Overberg, for the people on this side. And so they bought this farm and they replanted it, and got advice from different people like Hempies du Toit. I think at that time he kind of came in here and helped my father a little bit, or said, told them what to do, and a few, and eventually they were friends. Or my parents were friends with the Finlaysons and Hamilton Russells, and everybody then said to my mother, "You're crazy! Don't go into the wine business. This is way too complicated and it's a crazy business." I think Zelda kind of alluded to it, but they needed to do that, and they needed to add value to these beautiful grapes that we were growing, which were going to a cooperative. And that was in the 90s, and so 20 years of just growing grapes, and then the last 25 years of making our own wines. And it's my mother, and she started off the winemaking and had no official training. She just got advice from other good winemakers in the area, and people had a bit more time to give that kind of advice, and started off with like 1 barrel, then 5 barrels. So it was a very slow, organic kind of growth. And yeah, we've my sister was involved at that time, and she's since retired, had twins. She's not in the picture anymore, but this lady on this side, just below us here in the picture, is my sister-in-law, Nadia. She was involved for a few years, and she's also kind of retired after having children. And there's a picture of, like the family wall here. You got you. Those are my parents on their wedding day. So proper kind of hippie people. So at that time, in the 70s, so they kind of, it was always kind of coming from quite a farming background, kind of an eclectic mix of kind of inspiration from a mother who's an artist and a father who's just like a wannabe traveler, and eventually had to come back and do some real work, and they kind of got involved with this farm, and they did an amazing job. If you look at old pictures of the farm, you would hardly recognize it. From when they bought it, it was a bit like. I look at Artie Bardenroth's place now. When he bought that with his cousin, that looked a lot like Beaumont did in the 70s. The buildings run down, and it takes a lot of time and effort to kind of slowly fix it up and plant the trees around it and create an atmosphere. So we've now just recently, not recently, but my wife's always kind of been involved in the kind of behind the scenes a little bit, but more and more in front of the scenes. So she's got this catering business, which is now we've kind of ensconced in between the office and the tasting room, and we've just recently started offering some food. So she's now fully involved. She runs the finances behind the Beaumont business. Those invoices that you haven't paid, Dan, she's going to be on you to chase them up.
I love the family.
It's a proper family business, and I watch my kids running around here the other day. We actually have to tell the youngest one to put clothes on because he's hurling himself around the tasting room without any clothes. It's like, come on, it's public space. He's only 4, so it's kind of accepted.
Clearly,
I think we pride ourselves as being a proper family business. We're not bankrolled by any other business. That we live off what we make out of our wines, and we've got a few other sides to the business, which are a bit of fruit, some pears and apples, and some accommodation and some almonds and beautiful mountainside, and so it's an interesting farm.
I really love the family element to it. It provides such a rich history a relatively short space of time, and it speaks directly to a case of wine I have in my cellar that I think makes me rather unique. I don't think too many people have got this at all, and I can't remember if it is your wife or your mother who made a collection of Pinot Noir that I have a rather unique vertical collection of.
Nice one, Dan. That's awesome. That's my mother's. That's Jane's, yeah. My wife is Nikki, so you can't really mix it up. But I haven't quite made a wine yet for my wife. I'm slightly in the bad books on that one, but I'm working on the most perfect wine. But my mother, she had this kind of commitment with my father that they were going to retire and set up a little Pinot Noir Chardonnay business on the property. And then unfortunately he reneged on it and decided to die too young. And left my mum with a kind of dream of making Chardonnay and Pinot Noir, which we both share this kind of love of the grapes. And so, but she's kind of followed through on it, and she's made this 1 barrel Pinot every year and 1 barrel Chardonnay every year. And in true artist form, she's amazing in making it. But the selling part, we need a bit of help. We need to help her with that, So it's a bit of wine here. So it was a very cool project, And she combined her art with her winemaking. So you got some paintings with it and that kind of thing. It's a cool story.
Yeah, well, the case is untouched, so I'm looking for the right occasion to open it up, and very excited to do so. As I am every time I open a bottle of the Hope Marguerite, I have a glass of the 2018 prepared. And in a South African wine world where Chenin is better than it's ever been before, it's in such a great space as a grape and getting the accolades eventually that it's deserved but not received for so long. We have one of the very best. Explain to us why Hope Marguerite, and then introduce us to this particular wine of yours.
Cool, man. Yeah. I think it's why Hope Marguerite. Well, the family tradition continues. So we have a picture of the lady herself. So this is my grandmother from my father's side. This is Hope Marguerite, born in 1918, I think, and she arrived in the Cape from the UK, and I think her mother was so relieved to give birth to her in the Cape. She gave her the name Hope, as in Cape of Good Hope, So she got that as a first name. And she was kind of an incredible woman, as I think most people's experience with their grandparents are. I certainly see that with my mother and my kids having an amazing time together. Hope was kind of inspirational to all of us, and she kind of was involved with wine in a kind of from a passion kind of hobby point of view. She and Phyllis Hands, the founding member of the Cape Wine Academy, they traveled around France and Chile, I think, together on some interesting wine adventures way back in the 70s or early 80s. And and so Hope was always fascinated by wine, and she also kind of egged my parents on to start this wine business and to kind of get going with it and to renovate and restore things around the farm. And she loved gardening, and she was an incredible plant farming person. And we thought when we kind of started getting going with making wines, obviously in the Overberg at that time, or in this area, there were literally only Hamilton Russell and Bouchard Finnison making wine. And so there was very little reference for what would work other than what they were doing. And I think they were still in kind of experimental phase. They're much more focused now on Pinot Noir and Chardonnay. But in Bottrova, there was nobody, and there were a few vineyards around, but nobody making like commercial wines or with the labels. So we had to try and figure out what was going to work for us, and so we made a whole range. We made Sauvignon Blancs and Chardonnays and Chenin, and this was in 1996. And we made our first what we call barrel, I think it was like a barrel reserve Chenin in 1996 vintage, a wet cold vintage. Which I think produced the kind of classic Loire-like characters of that time in Chenin, with lots of wet dog and kind of like those more austere characters, which are quite difficult to get to grips with. But the wine spent, I think, 2 years on its lees in barrel, and turned out to be quite a fascinating wine. And we thought this was kind of, at that time, probably one of 2 or 3 barrel fermented Chenin Blancs in South Africa. This is only 20 odd years ago. So there's an amazing evolution of Chenin in South Africa. And I think that's been driven by a few producers who've really kind of got into it. And I think that's, we then in 97 decided to rename this barrel fermented style. We had the unwooded style, and then which is just our straight Chenin Blanc. And then we have the Hope Marguerite. So we decided the barrel fermented Chenin, we need to give it a name. And we decided to call it Hope Marguerite. And since then, at that time, it was like 2 or 3 barrels. And now we're producing 38 barrels, or 30, I might be slightly different on your bottle. I've got the 19 here. So.
30,
but each year it's around there now. And it's a wine that, everybody looks at it and says, "Oh wow, Hope Marguerite's an amazing wine," and how do you do it? I said, well, it's taken 22 years to do this. It's not, it hasn't happened overnight. And Chenin to really, especially going up to Joburg, we could always sell Sauvignon Blanc. You could sell Sauvignon Blanc like for every case of Chenin, you could sell 30 cases of Sauvignon Blanc, and you probably still can. Got to go and I'm waiting for those barleys to come down and visit us in December so I can re-educate them. So it's my main mission this year. As it is every year. But I think it's found its kind of groove. I think the one very unique thing is that a couple of unique things is that I've grown up with these vineyards, so they're the same age as me. They were planted in 74 and 78. So I kind of known these vineyards for a long time, not consciously always, obviously, but in the last 25, 30 years, very consciously. And I think we've kind of, I know which sections work and which sections ripen earlier and which ones are a little bit later. And they're both very special vineyards that go into producing Hope Marguerite. And that's the core of it. The rest is easy winemaking. The natural ferment, it just happens, and it does its thing. So, but I think we can talk a lot about this. Dan. I don't know how far you want to unleash me, but I can really.
You're making fans already. Skulk Stapelberg is watching, saying great story. We'll have to visit. Cheers. So Skulk, do get out there. Just make sure you've got some pinotage for him, Sebastian. Skulk is a big pinotage man. Terrific, Shannon. And I think for a lot of people, maybe Botrafir doesn't always feature on the areas they should go and visit. I know there are some challenges. It's a little out of the way, and there's also the danger of possibly seeing Niels Verberg in a pink tutu, which is a sight one tries to avoid if possible. But the reward is definitely there, and it's headlined by this particular wine, which just every year delivers something incredibly special. So, Sebastian, thank you. Real pleasure. We'll have to have you back on soon with some more of that wine, and maybe with your mum as well, and try some of her Pinot Noir as I give it the first crack. But thank you, and look forward to having some more of this off the Table Bay wine list over the weekend.
Cheers, Dan. Thanks for having me.
So there we go, Sebastian, the man who's bringing us such brilliant wine out of the Botrafir area from the Beaumont label. So that's 2 down for today, and 2 great wines so far from 2 great areas. We got somewhere a little more classical now to wrap up. Although when you look at the label, you might think, oh, that's a very strange place to have wine, because on the label in big letters is the word Tamboerskloof. And if you're watching this in South Africa, if you know the geography of Cape Town, you'll know that Tamboerskloof is the area just below Table Mountain. So is there this vast wine estate just below the cable car, or is it something else entirely? Well, let's find out from the wonderfully named Spicer de Villiers from Kleinood, which is the Tamboerskloof farm. Spicer, welcome. Lovely to see you. Thank you so much for being with us. Let's clear things up first of all. Tamboerskloof, I remember drinking this for the first time, loving it, thinking, this is great wine. And I had no idea that just before you go over the hill and down to Camps Bay, somewhere there's this giant wine estate, and I've never seen it. Of course, that isn't the case. Talk us through the name and how you came up with it.
Dan, thank you very much for having me. Tamboerskloof was where I was born and where our family lived before we bought the farm. And we ended up buying the farm while still staying in Tamboerskloof, the Tamboerskloof you're talking about in Cape Town. And when we moved out to the farm, it was a fruit farm at that stage, and we'd already built the winery, but the grapes were still maturing, and we decided, look, let's buy in some grapes and start experimenting with the wines we'd like to make, specifically the syrah. But we didn't want to label it under the farm's name, which is Kleinood. And so we ended up calling it Tamboerskloof, which is where our home was. And 5 years later, after we'd already established a bit of a brand and we started exporting wines and established relationships, we decided, look, now we're going to label it under the farm's name, Kleinood. We went to our exporters and our local agents, and we said, we're going to change the name. And their immediate reaction was, no, you're not. So here we are, Kleinood Farm, and we make Tamboerskloof wines. It's a bit of a confusing topic, but it's something that always reminds me of where I come from and where I was born and where I grew up. And I do apologize sincerely for the confusion it caused.
Not at all. I think it's a wonderful element of the story, and it shows so much about the stories. And that's just one element, though, because there's also your personal story. It's a family business. You're very much part of it now. But in the build-up to it, I know there's been lots of travels. You have the look of a surfer. Maybe that's just me having a look at somebody and making a judgment. But I know also you've had wine experience around the world, including some time making wine in Uruguay, of all places.
Yes, I did a harvest before I started studying. I did a harvest in Uruguay for Bodegas Carrao, working under Francisco Carrao. And then I did a harvest in Spain for De J. Palacios, working under Ricardo Palacios in Lyon. And then I realized that I did not really have the scientific acumen to become a winemaker, as much as I enjoyed the lifestyle and the way of going about things. So I had to find a different way to enter the industry, and I ended up studying advertising, working in big agencies, which I would not suggest to anybody. And went brand side, working for a big surf brand as a communications director, and then started my own agency, predominantly focused on the surf and sport and lifestyle industry. And slowly but surely I found myself, I was still based in Cape Town at that stage, and slowly but surely found myself gravitating towards the wine industry and starting to represent wine brands. And slowly but surely it grew into me having to drive out to the Beaumont and the Swartland and Franschhoek and Paul and Wellington on a daily basis. Next thing I knew, I made the call and moved out to the farm, Kleinood, which is based in the Beaumont Valley just outside of Stellenbosch, because it's somewhat closer to where my client base was. And the next thing I knew, that was pretty much all I was thinking about was Kleinood. You know, you end up walking around the farm in the morning and in the afternoon, and as you go to bed, that's what you're thinking about is, you know, what's going on in the vineyards, what's going on in the we have a lot of other things going on Kleinood as well, artist residencies, the natural forests, and last year, October, 1st of October, my birthday, I made the permanent call to work exclusively for and with Kleinood. So I started my first day on the job at Kleinood on my birthday. It was a bit of a shock to the system, but it's been a year and a bit now, and it's been an amazing journey, learning so much and having the best time ever.
I love the diversity of so many of our wine estates, the fact that they've got these fantastic things that they do beyond just the making of wine. You touched on the artist residency. Tell us a little bit more about that story, about the artist, about the forest, about the world beyond just wine at Tamboerskloof.
Our philosophy on Kleinood has always been that it's, as much as it is about making wine, it's not just about the wine. Kleinood means something small and precious in Dutch, and that's what we work towards on the farm. So whether it is the forest that we have, you can actually see behind me the map of the farm. The forest, which is a predominantly alien trees when we arrived, is slowly but surely turning into a forest of yellow woods and asagaaibos and natural vegetation. We have two streams that meet on the farm, the Blauwklippen stream and the Tamboerskloof stream, that come down from, wait, how does this work? From two of the valleys on the farm. And up the valley, two of the small little valleys that meet higher up in the valley, and they meet on the farm, and we've got a beautiful, beautiful ecosystem in the river. On the farm itself, we've got a beautiful ecosystem of animals, from porcupines through to caracal and antelope, and fortunately a fair amount of snakes as well. But and these things are important to us as much as it is to make wine. So we try and work in harmony, not only with our immediate ecosystem, but also with the ecosystem that was here before us. And we try to work very, very closely with our community, which in essence, whether it's a community, whether it's the wildlife, whether it's the plants that grow on the farm, it all forms one big ecosystem that has to work in harmony, and we feel very strongly about that.
It's a wonderfully rounded philosophy, and I firmly believe that sort of approach does benefit everything. There's some people who feel, oh, let's just focus on the wine, but I think what you're doing, that really inclusive approach, does work wonders. It is an estate, though, a name that for many people means one wine alone, and that is your Syrah, because it's been so successful. And when we taste it in a moment, we'll understand why. But I know you're more than just about that. Reginald Pekler, who's watching up at Cheetah Plains at the moment, saying the Santa Maria Tamboerskloof Catherine Rosé. It's my lifestyle wine to brag about, a masterpiece. So you've got fans for beyond just the Syrah. Talk to us about the range outside of the wine, which leads the charge. What else are you producing? What else is special about Kleinood?
So the initial philosophy was to create the Tamboerskloof Syrah that we're going to taste shortly. But through that, there was a bit of a evolution that started off with the fact that the Tamboerskloof Syrah includes a small amount of Viognier and a small amount of Mourvèdre, which is that classic Northern Rhone style blend. And we ended up, as the vines matured, we started lowering the production of the Viognier, or the blend, the amount of Viognier that went into the Syrah blend. And we had some more Viognier grapes. And we started making a Viognier. And slowly but surely, the Viognier developed into a brand of its own. We then planted a small block of Roussanne to make the Viognier more dynamic and complex. And then we also started harvesting the outside of the blocks earlier, obviously because of the grapes maturing earlier, and started making a rosé named after my sister Catherine, which is showing beautifully. I mean, the 2020 vintage is an absolute pleasure to drink. And now we're also, from time to time, making a pure Mourvèdre called the Meervaller. We made a pure Roussanne, which is wild. It's called the Rantsoen Roussanne, which is very experimental and only happens from time to time. And then I'm very honored that we're also making a pure Syrah from a very special block of grapes on the farm that's named after me. It's called the John Spicer Syrah. We've been making it since 2009 in small quantities. So it's very much started off with the flagship Tamboerskloof Syrah and evolved from that. And it's been an amazing journey to see it grow and become more dynamic and the whole process. But it's very undefined. Just like with any good wine, terroir dictates what you do and how you treat it. And that's very much how we've been treating the brand and the product range as well. It's been happening very organically and naturally, and it's been dictated by our vineyards.
I haven't tried the John Spicer Syrah. It's on my list, just to clarify things there. Spicer is obviously the birth name, and John is this crazy nickname. So that just clears that up. I'll put that on my list to try. But right now, I have a glass in front of me. It is the 2015. Two things for me, if you will, Mr. Spicer. One, just 2015, we know Cab in Stellenbosch was off the charts. How was this for you as a vintage for a mostly Syrah? And then also just the elements to it that explain, at least from your perspective, why this is such a successful wine.
I think I'm very honored and glad you enjoy the wine, Dan. I think from our side, the philosophy with regards to creating the Tamboerskloof Syrah range from starting point was to create something that's elegant, understated. It doesn't shout in your mouth, and it's still complex, but it's very much terroir driven. We believe strongly in the classic old philosophy that good wine is made in the vineyard, and I think that's carried through into both this vintage and all the other vintages we've created. 2015 was an exceptionally delicious vintage. I'm very fortunate we don't have that much in stock anymore, and I don't get to drink older vintages that often. So I'm very, very glad we're having this interview because I get to drink a bottle of this. But the 2015 vintage shows remarkably in its roundness and its elegance. Obviously, there's a complexity that plays on the classic Syrah red fruit and the pepperiness, and then carries over into a bit of a herbaceous floral side, which I enjoy a lot in Syrah specifically, and it doesn't show all that often. So when you get a vintage, or when you can, I don't want to say create, at the end of the day, the grapes dictate what it is. But when a vintage shows itself with these beautiful, elegant violets, and maybe even a bit of oily rosemariness, it makes for a very special wine.
And a wine that's been appreciated by many, many people, including loads of them here at the Table Bay, as it sits proudly on that wine list. Just before we let you go and maybe nip down the road to sneak in a quick surf before the end of the day, just going forward, you've touched on some of the new wines, the range is expanding. You're fairly early on in your full-time career with Kleinood and looking over the Tamboerskloof. What have we got to look forward to over the next few years? Anything exciting where beyond just the John Spicer, that Spicer himself is stamping his mark on the brand?
Look, to start off with, we're going to have to make a plan and get a bottle of that John Spicer to you as soon as possible. But apart from that, look, the brand is growing. The farm is small, and we're never going to become bigger. We're going to stay focused and work with what we have, and focus on attention to detail with what we have. I guess winemaking is a learning curve that never ends. Getting to understand your terroir, getting to understand your environment. Obviously, it changes from season to season, but I think we're going to keep playing with the farm, keep focusing on what we're doing right at the moment, but always be open to other opportunities, explore the Mourvèdre, explore the Roussanne, and that's pretty much where we're at. I think I don't know what else I have to say, really, but you must enjoy the surf. I wish I was there.
Sounds like an adventurous few years ahead. And I love the fact that after going out and finding your own way and doing things your own way, the family's reunited, and you're clearly enjoying the space and being happy back home, which is terrific. And why not? Because you get to drink some fabulous wine, even if not the older stuff as much as you'd like. Spicer, thank you. Can't wait to try that new one and to see where else the wine branches out into. But I think to the estate, this wine has given me a lot of pleasure over many years. And what I particularly like is when I open a bottle at home, my wife's more of the big, broad-shouldered Shiraz rather than the slightly more elegant and composed Syrah style. So I get to finish it, which is just fantastic. Thank you. Great pleasure. Really appreciate the time, and a big thank you to Gerard. I'm not sure if the architect is watching, but lovely to have had the family on board, and we look forward to some more wine together soon.
Cheers.
There we go. Spicer de Villiers wrapping us up on a really special edition of Dan Really Likes Wine, presented by Pick n Pay today, live from the Table Bay Hotel. The suite I'm in was infested with Miss South Africa finalists a week ago. This week it's got me. I think that's a rather natural segue. Big thank you to everybody who was watching today. And a big thank you to Joanne Selby and the team at the Table Bay for looking after us so well over the course of that reopening weekend, which kicks off properly from tomorrow. PJ Powers and I, together with our new Miss South Africa, Shirofadzwa, will be opening up the hotel tomorrow. We are about 300 yards, I'd guess, from one of the finer Pick n Pays in the country, the one down at the waterfront. I'll be down there tomorrow morning. And if you are there, make sure you're a member of, first of all, the Smart Shopper Club and then the Wine Club, because it's free of charge. And if you are a member of Pick n Pay's Wine Club, it's 3 times the Smart Shopper points on all your wine. You get 20% off 10 great wines each month. And there's deals on both magnums and cases, 25% off an entire case of wine. And that is all at Pick n Pay. And it's very simple to do. You just send your Smart Shopper number through and bang, away you go, all free of charge. That does it for today. Weekend to look forward to. Well, I'll be down here at the Table Bay. We'll be filming a fair bit. We've got a very special wine evening on Saturday, as I mentioned earlier. That includes Peter Ferreira and the wine of Graham Beck, the bubbles thereof. We'll also be trying out some wine from Delagraf with Mornay Frey, and from Waterford with Mark LaRue, and doing a Chardonnay brunch here at the Table Bay tomorrow as well. So a lot to look forward to. And then throwing forward to next week, what do we got next week? I'm struggling to remember. I think we might have some new releases coming up. I think from Carpsick, they've got some new releases, as well as something new from Beaumont as well. That's on the horizon. And I'll also be spending some time with Heidi Dermany from the Cape Wine Academy. That does it for today. I've got another glass or two of fabulous wine to have and an evening at the Table Bay to look forward to. Have a great weekend. And a big thank you to everyone watching, including Michelle LaRue, the world's finest ballet teacher, who's been watching this evening. Thank you, Michelle. And to Helen Nichol, my dear mum, watching in Belfast in Northern Ireland and celebrating more wonderful stories. Indeed, they are. And that really, I feel, is the best part of this particular show. Have a great evening. We'll see you again for more live tasting Monday next week. Good night.